Welcome back to the Murder Tapes podcast, Season 5, Episode 4. I hope you all had a great week. Wilson and I spent time with family and made some Beyond Burgers by the pool, which was a lot of fun, and swimming is literally one of my favorite things to do during the summertime, so I really enjoyed our weekend. I don't know what it is, but lately I have just been so sleepy. Like every day when Wilson gets home from work, we both just fall asleep on the couch after eating. Before we get into today's episode, I also just want to say welcome and thank you to all of our new listeners from TikTok. I started that account to build community, but I also started it so that you guys could see a whole different side of me that you typically wouldn't see since you're just listening to a podcast. And I promise that very soon I will be shooting live videos so that you can actually see me and listen to the podcast. So I hope you're learning new things from this podcast and hearing about new cases that aren't covered on the news. Today's episode is on the Omer Ninham case, and prior to researching new cases to cover, I had never heard of this case or seen it covered anywhere. Even when you search up this case online, there's hardly any information about it, which is exactly why I want to bring this to light. On September 24th, 1998, 13-year-old Zong Vang pedaled home along Webster Avenue, a plastic grocery bag filled with tomatoes swaying at his side. Sent by his older brother on a simple errand, Zong was unaware that this ordinary evening would soon turn into a nightmare. Out of nowhere, he was confronted by a group of 5 teenagers, 14-year-old Omer Ninham, along with 13-year-olds Richard Crepeau and Jeffrey P., and 2 other 14-year-olds, Amanda G. and Christian J. They didn't know him, nor did he provoke them in any way. Richard Crepeau, frustrated with his own life because he was angry at his mother, told Omer he wanted to fight or see a fight. Richard also said, "Let's mess with this kid," to which Omer responded, "I got your back." What began with taunts quickly spiraled into aggression. Richard shoved Zong, stealing his bicycle and carelessly tossing his grocery bag aside. When Zong pleaded for his bike, Omer responded with violence, punching Zong to the ground. Zong fled towards the nearby St. Vincent's Hospital parking ramp, but the 5 attackers were relentless. Their laughter echoed as they chased after him through the parking garage. When Zong made it to the 5th floor, Richard proceeded to punch him in the face again. Zong would repeatedly ask why they were all trying to hurt him and would beg them all to leave him alone. Instead of leaving him alone, like he asked, Richard and Omer began pushing Zong back and forth between them. They referred to this action as playing chicken. Omer then punched Zong again, this time in the chest, and continued pushing him back and forth. Omer then pinned him to the concrete wall by his wrists. Zong tried to move, but Richard kept punching him in the face. Richard would later state that Zong was crying and screaming the whole time and telling them to let him go. Richard grabbed Zong's ankles while Omer held his wrists, and they began swinging his body back and forth over the parking ramp's concrete wall. This drop was measured nearly 45 feet to the ground, and Zong began to plead with them again to please let him go. Richard let go of his feet and told Omer to drop him. Omer listened and let go of his wrists. Richard would later state that Zong just sailed over the wall. And after this all happened, all 4 attackers fled the scene and never once checked on Zong. A bystander named Stephen Harelli would testify that around 8 p.m. he was in his vehicle exiting the St. Vincent's Hospital parking ramp when he heard what sounded to him like a bag of wet cement hitting the pavement. Court documents would reveal that Zong landed on his back on the parking ramp's paved exit lane, 12 feet from the base of the ramp. Rescue personnel mentioned that when they arrived, they detected a faint pulse from Zong. He was then transported to St. Vincent's Hospital, where physicians weren't able to revive him. Zong's autopsy would reveal that he suffered a blunt impact to his head and trunk. His cause of death was due to craniocerebral trauma due to the fall from that height. Police were able to focus their investigation on 2 of the 5 juveniles. Jeffrey P. and Amanda J. told their relatives that they knew who was responsible for the murder of Zong. Jeffrey P. would say in his statement that Omer stood next to the edge of the wall for several seconds and looked over it to see Zong at the bottom. He then looked at Jeffrey and said, quote, "Don't say nothing. Better not say shit." On June 14, 1999, Omer was charged with first-degree intentional homicide in violation of Wisconsin state, along with physical abuse of a child contrary to Wisconsin state, both as a party to a crime under Wisconsin state. The charge of first-degree intentional homicide subjected Omer to the jurisdiction of criminal court. And on October 13, 1999, prior to the trial regarding the aforementioned charges, the state formally charged Omer with one count of making a threat to a judge in violation of Wisconsin state, and 3 counts of witness intimidation in violation of Wisconsin state. The complaint stated that while Omer was detained in the juvenile detention facility in Brown County, he threatened the life of Judge Richard J. Deet, who was the circuit court judge overseeing Omer's case at that time. The complaint also indicated that after becoming aware of statements made by other juveniles to law enforcement to rape and kill Amanda G. and to arrange for the killing of Richard's sister. On the initial charges of first-degree intentional homicide and physical abuse of a child, Omer's case proceeded to a 4-day jury trial. During the trial, Omer's defense asserted that he was not present in the parking ramp on the evening of September 24, 1998. And even if he had been, he did not intend to drop Zong from the edge. Omer provided inconsistent statements to law enforcement regarding his involvement and knowledge of Zong's death. Initially, he claimed that he and Zong were friends engaged in hoodie hopping or stealing hood ornaments, when they were pursued by 2 individuals in a Cadillac who believed Omer and Zong had stolen their hood ornament. Omer suggested that these individuals might have harmed Zong. However, he later retracted the statement, admitting that it was false. Omer stated that he was near St. Vincent's Hospital on September 24, 1998, intending to visit his brother's child, but claimed that he had never entered the hospital and instead went to his sister's house, where he consumed a significant amount of alcohol and was later taken into custody for underage drinking and placed in detoxification. Ultimately, Omer denied being anywhere near the St. Vincent's Hospital parking ramp on September 24, 1998. In Omer's closing argument, his counsel did not deny that Omer was on the parking ramp with Zong and basically admitted to the allegation of physical abuse of a child. Quote, "In terms of the abuse of a child, I'm not going to argue that. I think obviously there was some pushing back and forth and some punching going on. I don't know specifically when, but there's been a little bit of disagreement as to who hit who and so forth, but I think that's a given. I think he helped in that. I think Omer participated in that. But the question, and the tough question, is whether or not Omer Ninham formed the intent at age 14 to, in fact, kill Zong Vang. And it is our position, and I can't state it more strongly, that he did not, in fact, form that intent. Whether Ricky Crepeau did or not is not necessary, but he did not. Nor did he know what Ricky Crepeau was going to do. Bad judgment, bad juvenile, bad a lot of things. But I don't think you can saddle Omer Ninham at this point from the facts and evidence on this record with intentional homicide. On March 24, 2000, the jury found Omer guilty of both first-degree intentional homicide and physical abuse of a child. On June 29, 2000, the circuit court held a sentencing hearing. At the beginning of the hearing, the state requested to dismiss 1 count of threat to a judge and 3 counts of intimidation of a witness, but requested that all 4 charges be presented for consideration. The circuit court granted the state's motion, and the pre-sentence investigation, or PSI, indicated that Omer, who was 16 years old at the time, continued to deny any involvement in Zong's homicide. The PCI further noted that Omer came from a highly dysfunctional family environment, with both parents and several siblings engaged in severe substance abuse and domestic violence. His parents, along with his older brothers, would use closed fists and weapons to abuse him. Omer's father was even incarcerated for it. It was also noted that Omer received his very first toothbrush when he was 14 from a youth shelter. They characterized him as a serious substance abuser, reporting that he used cocaine weekly and had been consuming alcohol daily since grade school, often to the point of unconsciousness, and he was typically alone. Omer was examined by a clinical neuropsychologist who concluded that he no longer suffers from the severe behavioral discontrol that dominated his young teenage years, and that he does not suffer from psychopathy or any serious psychiatric disorder, and they believe has grown into a thoughtful young man whose prognosis for successful re-entry into the community and absence of recidivism is very good, which is pretty crazy to me considering all of the evidence and just the case in general. The PSI also mentioned that Omer, who is a member of the Menominee Indian tribe, expressed a recent interest in Native American spirituality. Additionally, the PSI detailed the Zong family's devastation following the loss of their son and brother. Zong's parents recounted their migration from Laos and Thailand, believing they would find safety and prosperity in the United States. However, they expressed that they had escaped evil only to encounter it anew. They communicated a loss of faith in the inherent goodness of people and conveyed that their remaining children were afraid to leave the confines of their home. Zong's brother, Sing Se Vang, provided a statement on behalf of Zong's family and friends during the sentencing hearing. Sing Se urged the circuit court to impose the maximum sentence of life imprisonment without parole on Omer, stating it should reflect the same brutal and merciless ultimatum as Omer had given to Zong on September 24, 1998. He then articulated a belief rooted in his family's Hmong culture. Quote, "In our Hmong culture, we believe that the spirit of a murdered person cannot be set free to go in peace until the perpetrators be brought to justice. Therefore, we ask the court, who is the only one to have the power to set free the spirit of our beloved son, brother, and friend, Zong, to go in peace by bringing Omer Ninham and his accomplices to justice." Omer also spoke at sentencing. He told the circuit court that he was sorry about Zong's death, but quote, "There wasn't nothing I could do. I wasn't there. I'm going to keep saying that until the day I die. I was not there, and that's the honest truth." Regarding the charge of first-degree intentional homicide, the circuit court imposed a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for Omer. In relation to the charge of physical abuse of a child, the court sentenced Omer to 5 years imprisonment to be served consecutively to the life sentence. In determining Omer's sentence, the circuit court weighed 3 main factors: the severity of the offense, the characteristics of the offender, and the necessity of public protection. First, the court deemed the severity of the offense to be beyond description and unequivocally horrific. It acknowledged the profound impact the offense had on Zong's family, friends, and the broader Green Bay community. Second, while the circuit court recognized that Omer is a minor, it described him as a frightening young man. Although the court noted Omer's background in a dysfunctional family, it stated that this should not excuse his actions, asserting that he is a child of the street who knew what he was doing. Third, the court concluded that the community must be safeguarded from Omer, stating, quote, "Society needs to know, and especially this community needs to know, that you can send your child to the grocery store and expect to see him again." The circuit court noted its astonishment at Omer's continued denial of his presence on the evening of Zong's death. It acknowledged that alcohol was a frequent aspect of Omer's life, but did not consider this an acceptable justification for his conduct, concluding that Omer had consistently failed to seize opportunities to distance himself from adverse influences. Additionally, the circuit court remarked on what it referred to as an interesting clash of cultures. Quote, "I find it incredibly interesting and somewhat significant that not only am I being asked to impose a sentence in this matter, which is my obligation and my responsibility, but I'm being asked to release a soul. I have to comment on that because that's an interesting clash of cultures, and it's what we're all about as people. We have to deal with those cultures and those clashes as positively as we can. And everything I know about you, Omer, and everything I've gleaned about you, from the information that's been provided to me, you dealt with those things oppositionally. You weren't willing to let those cultures and those different ideas intermingle. It had to be your way or no way at all. That's too bad. And it's that attitude that you're going to have to change. I would hope that you turn to spirituality. Native American spirituality gives you something to build on that regard. It had better, because I can tell you right now, if your attitude and your ruthlessness and the perception that you have of your relationship to the community in which you are going to find yourself continues as it is, you're in for a real tough ride. On November 16, 2000, Omer submitted an initial motion for post-conviction relief, the specifics of which are not relevant to this discussion. The circuit court denied Omer's motion, and this decision was subsequently upheld by the Court of Appeals in a published ruling. Then, on March 1, 2005, the United States Supreme Court issued a ruling in Roper v. Simmons, determining that the 8th and 14th Amendments forbid imposition of the death penalty on offenders who were under the age of 18 when their crimes were committed. Following this decision on October 18, 2007, Omer filed a motion for sentencing relief under Wisconsin state law, arguing that his life imprisonment without parole contravenes the 8th and 14th Amendments of the United States Constitution as well as Article 1. Section 6 of the Wisconsin Constitution. Alternatively, Omer requested that the circuit court modify his sentence to permit eligibility for parole based on 3 grounds. 1. New scientific evidence regarding adolescent brain development constitutes a new factor relevant to his sentencing. 2. His sentence is excessively harsh. And 3. The circuit court improperly considered the religious beliefs of the victim's family during sentencing. Omer's 2007 post-conviction motion also raised issues of ineffective assistance of his initial post-conviction counsel and claimed entitlement to a new trial in the interest of justice. However, these issues were not pursued on appeal and will not be addressed further. The circuit court denied Omer's motion, choosing not to alter his sentence. In its determination regarding the constitutionality of sentencing a 14-year-old to life imprisonment without parole, the circuit court stated it was obligated to uphold existing law. It found the ruling in Roper, which pertains to capital punishment for juveniles, was not applicable to Omer's situation. The circuit court also dismissed Omer's alternative arguments for sentence modification regarding Omer's assertion of a new factor. The circuit court found no significant differences between the new scientific evidence presented and the psychological findings related to adolescence discussed by the Supreme Court in Thompson v. Oklahoma, which was issued 12 years prior to Omer's sentencing. Moreover, the circuit court determined that while Omer's life imprisonment without parole sentence is severe, it is not excessively so, considering the seriousness of the crime and Omer's conduct while awaiting sentencing. The court also concluded it did not improperly rely on the spiritual beliefs of the victim's family during sentencing. Rather, it noted the loss experienced by Zong's family and friends was relevant. On March 3, 2009, the Court of Appeals affirmed the circuit court's order denying Omer's post-conviction motion for sentencing relief. Like the circuit court, the Court of Appeals held that the Supreme Court's ruling in Roper does not support Omer's claim that sentencing a 14-year-old to life without parole is unconstitutional. Additionally, the Court of Appeals rejected Omer's assertion that his sentence was unusual under the 8th Amendment, finding the statistics he provided about other juveniles arrested for homicide to be unconvincing. The court stated, quote, "Omer's crime was unusual for its senseless and extreme brutality. The statistics Omer provides do not establish that life without parole is a rare sentence for a juvenile whose crimes and character are comparable to his own." The Court of Appeals also dismissed Omer's 3 alternative arguments for sentence modification, concluding that the brutality of Omer's crime and the additional offenses he committed after his arrest defeat the argument that his sentence is unduly harsh and excessive. The Court of Appeals found that Omer had not demonstrated a new factor warranting sentence modification, affirming that the circuit court was already aware of the differences between juvenile and adult offenders at the time of sentencing, rendering a new physiological explanation for these differences irrelevant. Lastly, the Court of Appeals refuted Omer's claim regarding reliance on improper factors during sentencing, stating that the religious reference was merely a comment on Omer's intolerance. Omer subsequently petitioned this court for a review, and on September 13, 2010, the court granted his petition. In 2011, however, the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled that sentencing a 14-year-old to life without parole for intentional homicide is not categorically unconstitutional under the cruel and unusual punishment standard, and that his sentence was not harsh. In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court denied Omer's petition for a writ of certiorari. They declined to hear his case. Omer has consistently told the media that he doesn't think he deserves the sentence that he got. And I really want to know what you guys think about this, if you think his sentence was too harsh, or how exactly you think they should have gone about sentencing him and Zong's other attackers. Unfortunately, Amanda G. and Jeffrey P. were not charged in any way, shape, or form because they were just witnesses, according to the police. And Richard Crepeau was convicted of murder and sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 50 years. When I tell you this case was so hard to read about because I have a younger brother, and all I could think of is how scared Zong must have been when he was attacked. Everyone that was involved deserved to be held accountable for their actions, and my heart just really hurts for Zong's family. So I really hope that they feel that they got some sense of justice. I also wanted to quickly ask you guys if you've ever heard of this case, because before deep diving, I had not, and I definitely think that it deserves a lot more attention. Aside from that, all of the information on this case will be linked in the show notes. Feel free to follow our Instagram and TikTok at Murder Tapes Podcast, or my personal at Annalisa. I did also start up a Buy Me a Coffee account, so if you would like to, but no pressure, the link for that will also be in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you on the next one.